The world has spent centuries convincing you that happiness is waiting just one more achievement away. One more promotion, one more relationship, one more purchase, one more dream fulfilled. You wake up believing that if you keep moving forward, one day the emptiness inside you will finally disappear. But what if the emptiness isn't a mistake? What if it's the very mechanism that keeps your entire life in motion? Most people will spend their entire existence chasing something they can never truly possess. And they will never realize why. There was one philosopher who looked directly into this uncomfortable reality without turning away. While others offered hope, optimism, or comforting illusions, Arthur Schopenhauer delivered something far more dangerous, a truth so unsettling that many refuse to even consider it. According to him, the greatest prison was never built from walls or chains. It was built inside the human mind. And once you understand how that prison works, you'll never see yourself or the world the same way again. Before we begin this journey, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this video from? Tell me your city in the comments. It's fascinating to see people from every corner of the world gathering to reflect on the same timeless questions. And while you're there, answer this. Do you believe human beings can ever be truly satisfied, or are we destined to want more forever? There are no right or wrong answers, only honest ones. If this kind of philosophy speaks to something deep inside you, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Every video here is an invitation to slow down, question what most people accept without thinking, and explore ideas that have transformed minds for centuries. If that's the journey you want to continue, you're more than welcome to stay. Number 10, the endless trap of desire. Imagine walking through an empty street before sunrise. The city is silent. Rain falls softly against the pavement, and for a brief moment, everything seems peaceful. Yet inside your mind there is noise, endless thoughts, endless plans, endless worries. Even when the world is quiet, something inside you refuses to stop moving. Schopenhauer believed this wasn't an accident. It was the very essence of existence itself. Most people assume they control their desires. They think they choose what they want. But Schopenhauer proposed something almost terrifying. What if your desires are the ones controlling you? That idea becomes even more disturbing when you start paying attention to your own life. Think about the last thing you desperately wanted. Perhaps it was money, a new job, recognition, love, a better body, a bigger house for weeks, maybe months. Your entire emotional state revolved around obtaining it. You imagined that reaching your goal would finally bring peace. You sacrificed sleep, energy, relationships, and time because your mind kept whispering the same promise. Once you have this, everything will be different. Then one of two things happened. Either you failed or you succeeded. Surprisingly, neither outcome gave you lasting peace. Failure brought frustration. Success brought relief, but only for a little. Well, soon another desire appeared, another mountain to climb, another finish line, another promise, and the cycle quietly started. Again, most people never stop long enough to notice this pattern. They simply call it ambition. Society applauds it. Advertisements feed it. Social media glorifies it. Entire industries depend on keeping human beings convinced that fulfillment is always just beyond the next purchase, the next experience, the next achievement. Schopenhauer looked at this endless race and reached a conclusion that shocked the philosophical world. He believed that what drives human life is not reason. It is not happiness. It is not morality. It is something much deeper, something ancient, something blind, he called it the will, not willpower in the modern sense, not determination, not motivation. The will, according to Schopenhauer, is the invisible force beneath all existence. It is the endless impulse that pushes every living creature to survive, reproduce, compete, consume, desire, and continue moving without ever asking why. It lives inside every heartbeat, every instinct, every craving, every fear, every dream. You don't simply have desires, You are an expression of desire itself, and that changes everything, because if your deepest nature is endless wanting, then satisfaction becomes almost impossible. The moment one desire is fulfilled, another immediately takes its place. It's like trying to fill a bucket with no bottom. No matter how much you pour into it, it never stays full. This explains something millions of people secretly experience but rarely admit. Why do successful people often remain unhappy? Why do celebrities who seem to have everything still struggle with anxiety, addiction, or despair? Why do wealthy individuals continue chasing more wealth long after they've secured a comfortable life? Schopenhauer's answer is brutally simple: because the object of desire was never the real problem. The will itself never stops. It cannot stop. Its nature is movement, its language is lack, its fuel is dissatisfaction. And perhaps, without realizing it, you've already felt this truth many times. Remember the excitement. Before buying something you wanted for months, the anticipation felt almost magical. Then the package arrived for a day, maybe a week. You felt different. Then the excitement faded. The object stayed. The feeling disappeared. Not because the object changed, because the will immediately found something else to chase. This endless mechanism quietly shapes modern civilization. Every notification promises significance. Every advertisement promises fulfillment. Every trend promises belonging. Every comparison whispers that someone else is living the life you should have without noticing. Entire generations become trapped inside a machine powered by perpetual dissatisfaction. And the most dangerous part, many people mistake this constant agitation for life itself. They believe that slowing down means failure, that silence means laziness, that contentment means giving up. But Schopenhauer would argue the opposite. Perhaps the inability to stop wanting is the real prison. And if that's true, then one question becomes impossible to ignore. If desire is the source of suffering, is freedom even possible? The answer, Schopenhauer discovered, is far more surprising than most people imagine. And before we reach it, there's another illusion almost everyone believes without question. An illusion so powerful that it silently controls nearly every decision we make. That illusion is happiness itself. Number 9, happiness is only a pause between desires. If there is one belief almost every human being carries without question, it is this: happiness is something to be achieved. We spend years building our lives around that assumption. We tell ourselves that once we graduate, we'll be happy. Once we find the right partner, we'll be happy. Once we earn enough money, buy the house we dreamed of, or finally receive the recognition we've been chasing, life will somehow settle into lasting fulfillment. But has it ever happened that way? Take a moment and think back to one of the happiest days of your life. Maybe it was your first job, your wedding day, a major accomplishment, the purchase of something you had wanted for years. At that moment, it felt as though you had finally arrived, as if the restless voice inside your mind had gone silent. Yet days passed, weeks passed. Life quietly returned to normal. The excitement faded, the extraordinary became ordinary, and without even noticing, your mind found something new to pursue. Schopenhauer believed this wasn't a personal failure. It wasn't because you lacked gratitude. It wasn't because you were incapable of appreciating what you had. It happened because desire never truly ends. The will simply changes its target. Imagine standing in the middle of the ocean, desperately trying to calm the waves with your hands. Every time one wave disappears, another rises behind it. That is how desire operates. It is not interested in allowing you to rest. It survives by creating new forms of longing. This is why happiness often feels so fragile. Not because joyful moments aren't real, they are. But according to Schopenhauer, happiness is usually nothing more than the temporary absence of suffering. It is the brief silence between two demands made by the will. Think about that idea. When you're hungry, food feels wonderful. When you're exhausted, sleep feels like paradise. When you're lonely, companionship becomes everything. But once the need is satisfied, the emotional intensity fades. Soon another lack appears, asking to be fulfilled. The cycle continues again and again. Perhaps this explains why modern life feels so exhausting. Every day you're surrounded by messages insisting that you're missing something: a better phone, better career, a better body, a better vacation, better version of yourself. The world has become remarkably efficient at feeding dissatisfaction because dissatisfaction keeps people moving. It keeps economies growing. It keeps attention locked onto screens. It keeps comparison alive, but Schopenhauer warned that this endless pursuit comes with an invisible cost. The more your happiness depends on external circumstances, the less control you have over your inner life. Suddenly, your peace belongs to things that constantly change. Markets change, relationships change, health changes, status changes, beauty changes, even your own desires change. If your emotional stability depends on what is unstable, how could lasting peace ever exist? This is where Schopenhauer's philosophy becomes deeply unsettling. He wasn't saying that success is meaningless. He wasn't arguing that love has no value. He wasn't telling people to reject life completely. He was asking a far more difficult question. What happens when you stop expecting temporary pleasures to solve permanent dissatisfaction? That question alone has the power to transform an entire life, because most people never ask it. Instead, they continue running faster, harder, further, convinced that the next destination will finally be different from all the others. And every time reality disappoints them, they assume they simply chose the wrong goal. Rarely do they suspect that the chase itself may be the source of the disappointment. The strange irony is that many of the people society admires the most secretly discover this truth. Some become famous only to realize recognition cannot silence the mind. Others accumulate unimaginable wealth only to discover that comfort and fulfillment are not the same thing. Some achieve everything they dreamed about and quietly fall into depression because they have nowhere left to project their hopes. This isn't proof that success is bad. It's proof that success cannot solve a problem that exists beneath ambition itself. Schopenhauer believed the will always whispers the same lie. Just one more achievement, one more relationship, one more victory, one more possession, one more experience, and after that, surely you'll be complete. But complete never arrives, because the will has no finish line, only movement. This is one of the darkest ideas in philosophy, yet hidden inside it is an unexpected form of freedom. If happiness cannot be permanently found through endless acquisition, then perhaps it was never supposed to be found there. Perhaps peace begins the moment you stop asking life to provide what it was never designed to give. This doesn't mean giving up on your dreams. It means refusing to become their prisoner. It means learning to enjoy success without depending on it, to appreciate pleasure without worshiping it, to experience loss without believing your entire existence has collapsed. In many ways, this is where Schopenhauer quietly meets the wisdom of the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that everything external is temporary. Epictetus taught that suffering grows whenever we try to control what isn't ours to control. Buddha spoke of attachment as the root of suffering. Each arrived by a different road, yet all pointed toward the same mountain. Freedom begins inside, not outside. Still, even after understanding this, another question remains. If desire constantly deceives us, why do we keep believing every new desire will finally be different? To answer that, we must confront another uncomfortable truth about human nature, one that explains why so many people spend their entire lives running from silence instead of listening to it. Number 8. Why most people never truly think. There is a silence that many people fear more than failure. It isn't the silence of an empty room. It isn't the silence of a lonely street before sunrise. It is the silence that appears when every distraction disappears and you are left alone with your own mind. For many, that silence feels unbearable, not because silence is painful, but because it reveals everything we've been trying to escape. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that most people rarely stop to examine the forces driving their lives. They simply follow habits, instincts, social expectations, and desires without ever asking the most important question of all. Why do I want what I want? It sounds simple, yet almost no one asks it honestly. Think about your biggest goals. Did you choose them, or did they quietly choose you? How many dreams are genuinely yours, and how many were planted by society, advertising, family expectations, or the endless comparison created by social media? From childhood, we're taught what success should look like. A certain career, a certain income, a certain lifestyle, a certain image. Without realizing it, we spend decades climbing a ladder that someone else built. Then one day, we reach the top, only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. Schopenhauer observed that human beings often mistake movement for purpose. As long as we're busy, we assume we're making progress. As long as we're occupied, we feel important. But busyness can become one of the greatest forms of escape, because if you're always running, you never have to ask where you're going. Look around. People fill every empty moment with noise, music, podcasts, television, scrolling, notifications, conversations that say nothing. Constant stimulation has become the background music of modern life, not because information is bad, but because silence forces confrontation. And confrontation can change everything. Imagine sitting alone during a rainy evening, no phone, no television, no distractions, just the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. At first, your thoughts race, memories appear, regrets surface. Dreams you've ignored begin knocking on the door of your consciousness. Questions you've avoided for years suddenly become impossible to silence. Am I living the life I actually want? Why am I chasing this? Who would I be without constant approval? What am I afraid of losing? Those questions make many people uncomfortable. So they return to distraction. Another video, another purchase, another goal, anything except facing themselves. Schopenhauer understood something astonishing. The greatest prison isn't ignorance, it's unconscious living, existing on autopilot. Repeating, yesterday because questioning today feels too frightening. This is why genuine thinking is so rare. Thinking isn't collecting information. It isn't memorizing quotes. It isn't winning arguments online. Real thinking is dangerous because it has the power to destroy illusions you've spent your entire life protecting. Nietzsche would later express a similar idea in his own way. He believed that many people preferred comforting lies over difficult truths, not because they were weak, but because truth demands transformation. Once you truly see reality, you cannot pretend you haven't. That is why philosophy has always frightened societies more than weapons. Weapons can destroy bodies. Ideas can completely reshape lives. Every great philosopher began by asking questions most people avoid. What is happiness? What is freedom? What is suffering? Who am I beneath my desires? Those questions don't offer immediate comfort. They create uncertainty, but uncertainty is often the birthplace of wisdom. Schopenhauer believed that wisdom begins the moment you stop assuming your first impulse is always correct. The mind says, I need this. Wisdom asks, do I really? The ego says, I deserve more. Wisdom asks, will more actually change anything? Desire says, if only I had that. Wisdom quietly replies, you said that last time. That simple realization can be deeply unsettling. How many times have you promised yourself that one achievement would finally complete you? How many times has life proven otherwise? There comes a point when repeating the same pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Some people call it a crisis, others call it awakening. Schopenhauer might simply call it seeing the machinery behind desire, seeing the illusions sold by society, seeing how easily the human mind becomes attached to things that cannot provide lasting peace. But seeing alone isn't enough, because awareness creates another challenge. Once you recognize the trap, how do you stop falling into it? That answer begins in a place modern culture rarely encourages us to visit. Not in crowds, not in applause, not in endless productivity, but in solitude, because solitude is where the noise begins to fade, and only when the noise fades can you finally hear yourself, which brings us to the next lesson. Number 7, why solitude is where freedom begins. Number 7, why solitude is where freedom begins. Few experiences frighten modern people more than being completely alone. Not because solitude is dangerous, but because, without distractions, we are forced to meet the person we have been avoiding for years. Arthur Schopenhauer once observed that a person's ability to enjoy solitude is one of the clearest signs of intellectual and emotional maturity. Most people hear those words and immediately misunderstand them. They imagine loneliness, isolation, or rejecting the world entirely. That was never the point. Schopenhauer wasn't encouraging people to escape society. He was encouraging them to stop depending on it. There is a profound difference. The person who cannot spend a single evening without constant stimulation is not free. The person who constantly seeks approval is not free. The person who needs applause to feel valuable is not free. Because whenever your peace depends on something outside yourself, your happiness is always at the mercy of circumstances you cannot control. Look carefully at the world around you. People wake up and immediately reach for their phones. Before their feet even touch the floor, they are already absorbing other people's opinions, achievements, vacations, arguments, and carefully edited versions of reality. Without realizing it, they begin comparing their own lives before they have even lived a single moment of the day. Comparison quietly becomes anxiety. Anxiety becomes dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction creates new desires, and the cycle begins all over again. Schopenhauer believed that much of human suffering grows stronger because we rarely allow ourselves to simply exist. Every empty moment becomes something that must be filled. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Stillness feels unproductive. Doing nothing feels like failure. But what if those quiet moments are exactly where wisdom begins? Imagine a small cabin hidden deep within a forest. Outside, rain falls gently over the trees. A cold wind moves through the branches. There is no traffic, no notifications, no expectations. Only the sound of nature and your own breathing. At first, your mind rebels. Thoughts rush in from every direction. Old conversations replay themselves. Future worries begin creating imaginary disasters. Regrets knock on the door one after another. It feels chaotic. Many people mistake this for proof that solitude is harmful. In reality, the noise was already there. Solitude simply removed the distractions that had been hiding it. That realization changes everything, because now the problem is visible. And what becomes visible can eventually be understood. This is why so many philosophers voluntarily spent long periods alone. Not because they hated people, because they wanted to hear something deeper than the endless noise of society. Marcus Aurelius often withdrew into himself, even while surrounded by the responsibilities of leading an empire. Epictetus reminded his students that no one can disturb the mind unless we allow them to. Buddha left behind comfort and status to search for something no amount of luxury could provide. Each walked a different path, yet all discovered that silence reveals truths impossible to hear in constant distraction. Schopenhauer admired great art for exactly the same reason. A beautiful piece of music, a powerful painting, a breathtaking landscape. For a few precious moments, the endless machinery of desire grows quiet. You stop thinking about yourself. You stop calculating. You stop chasing. You simply observe. In those rare moments, the will loosens its grip. That is why beauty can feel almost sacred, not because it solves your problems, but because it briefly frees you from them. Think about the last time you stood before an ocean at sunset, or looked up at a sky filled with stars. For just a moment, your ambitions disappeared. Your worries became smaller. Your endless list of goals stopped shouting. There was only presence. Schopenhauer believed those moments offered a glimpse of another way of living. Not a permanent escape, but a reminder that peace does exist, even if only for a little while. The tragedy is that most people experience those moments, then immediately return to the same frantic race. They mistake peace for boredom, silence for emptiness, stillness for weakness. Yet perhaps the strongest person in the room is not the loudest one. Perhaps it is the one who no longer needs constant validation. The one who can sit quietly without feeling incomplete. The one who has learned that value does not come from attention, it comes from understanding. There is an old saying that if you cannot enjoy your own company, you are carrying around bad company. Schopenhauer would likely smile at that thought, because until you become comfortable with yourself, no relationship, no achievement, no possession, no amount of success will ever permanently remove the restlessness within. Eventually, every distraction loses its power. And when it does, you are left with the person you have become. That is why solitude is not an escape from reality. It is an encounter with reality. And once you truly meet yourself, another question naturally follows. If silence reveals who we are, then what is suffering trying to teach us? Most people spend their lives trying to avoid pain at any cost. But Schopenhauer believed pain carries a message that comfort never could. That message becomes the foundation of our next lesson. Number 6, why suffering reveals reality. Number 6, why suffering reveals reality. If you could remove every painful experience from your life, would you? Most people would answer without hesitation. Of course, who would willingly choose heartbreak over love, failure over success, loss over comfort, grief over certainty? It seems like an obvious choice. Yet Arthur Schopenhauer believed that pain, uncomfortable as it may be, reveals truths that comfort carefully hides. Pleasure has a strange habit of distracting us. When everything is going well, we rarely stop to question life. We assume tomorrow will look like today. We believe the people we love will always be there. We imagine our health will remain unchanged. We convince ourselves that stability is permanent. But reality has never made such a promise. One unexpected phone call, one diagnosis, one betrayal, one financial collapse, one goodbye. That is all it takes for the illusion of certainty to disappear. Suddenly, the future that once seemed guaranteed becomes uncertain. The priorities that once felt urgent lose their importance. The things we believed mattered most no longer seem significant. Pain has a way of rearranging reality. Schopenhauer didn't glorify suffering. He wasn't suggesting that pain is something we should seek. Instead, he argued that suffering strips away illusions. It forces us to see life without decoration, without fantasy, without false promises. Think about the strongest people you have ever met. How many of them became wise because life was easy? Very few. More often, wisdom is forged through disappointment. Compassion grows from understanding loss. Patience grows from enduring hardship. Humility grows from recognizing how little we truly control. This is one of the great paradoxes of existence. The experiences we would never choose often become the ones that transform us the most. Imagine a sculptor standing before a massive block of marble. To someone unfamiliar with the process, every strike of the hammer looks destructive. Pieces fall away, dust fills the air, the stone appears damaged, but the sculptor sees something different. Every piece removed reveals the figure hidden inside. Perhaps suffering works in much the same way. It removes illusions, false identities, artificial ambitions, the desperate need to impress strangers. Little by little, pain strips away everything that isn't essential. What remains is often stronger than what existed before. This doesn't mean suffering automatically creates wisdom. Many people experience hardship and become bitter. Others experience the same hardship and become compassionate. The difference is not found in the pain itself. It is found in how we respond to it. This is where Schopenhauer quietly intersects with the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that obstacles are not interruptions to life. They are part of life. Epictetus taught that while we cannot control what happens to us, we can shape our response to it. Schopenhauer agreed that suffering is unavoidable, but unlike the Stoics, he believed suffering originates from something even deeper. The endless will that keeps us attached to outcomes, expectations, and desires. The greater the attachment, the greater the suffering when reality refuses to cooperate. Think about how often disappointment begins long before anything actually happens. We create stories in our minds. We imagine perfect futures, perfect relationships, perfect careers, perfect lives. Then reality arrives, not cruelly, simply honestly. Reality refuses to obey imagination, and that gap between expectation and reality becomes suffering. Perhaps this is why some of the happiest moments in life arrive unexpectedly, without planning, without obsession, without forcing them into existence. The more desperately we try to control every outcome, the more anxious we become, because control itself is an illusion. You can influence many things. You can prepare. You can work hard. You can make wise decisions. But you cannot command the universe. You cannot force people to love you. You cannot stop time. You cannot prevent change. You cannot guarantee tomorrow. Schopenhauer believed accepting this truth is painful. But strangely, it is also liberating, because once you stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world, you stop fighting reality itself. The energy once wasted resisting life becomes available for living it. There is another lesson hidden inside suffering, one that most people never notice. Pain has an extraordinary ability to connect human beings. Success often creates comparison. Failure creates understanding. When someone has truly suffered, they become capable of recognizing the invisible burdens carried by others. That is why compassion occupies such an important place in Schopenhauer's philosophy. He believed compassion is one of the few ways we temporarily escape the prison of the ego. For a brief moment, another person's suffering matters as much as our own. The illusion of separation weakens, and something profoundly human emerges. But compassion alone is not enough to free us from the endless cycle of desire. There is another force quietly shaping every decision we make, a force so subtle that most people mistake it for their own personality. Yet according to Schopenhauer, it is the invisible engine behind nearly every action. Understanding that force changes everything, and that is exactly where our journey leads next. Number 5, the world is a mirror of the will. Number 5, the world is a mirror of the will. Have you ever wondered why two people can experience the exact same event and walk away with completely different realities? One person loses a job and sees the end of everything. Another loses a job and discovers the beginning of a better life. One person sees a rainy day as depressing. Another finds peace in the sound of rain against the window. The world itself hasn't changed. What changed was the mind observing it. Schopenhauer believed that reality is never experienced in a purely objective way. We don't simply see the world as it is. We see it through the endless movement of the will. Every fear, every hope, every expectation, and every desire acts like a lens, coloring everything we experience. That explains why the same success can feel meaningless to one person and life-changing to another. It explains why some people spend their entire lives surrounded by abundance, yet constantly feel deprived, and why others, with very little, carry a quiet sense of gratitude that cannot be bought. The external world certainly matters, but the inner world determines how that external world is interpreted. Imagine looking into a lake on a calm morning. When the water is still, you can clearly see the reflection of the mountains, the trees, and the sky. But if the water becomes turbulent, every reflection is distorted. The mountains appear broken. The sky seems shattered. Nothing outside has changed, only the surface doing the reflecting. Schopenhauer believed the human mind works in much the same way. A restless mind cannot perceive reality clearly. A mind dominated by endless craving interprets everything according to lack. Every victory feels incomplete. Every possession seems temporary. Every achievement quickly becomes ordinary. The will whispers the same message over and over again. You still don't have enough. That whisper is so constant that most people mistake it for their own thoughts. They believe the voice is their identity. But what if it isn't? What if the voice urging you to chase more is simply the machinery of the will doing exactly what it has always done? This idea can feel unsettling because it suggests that many of our strongest impulses are not conscious choices at all. They are expressions of something far older than the individual, something biological, something instinctive, something woven into existence itself. Yet Schopenhauer did not believe we were completely powerless. He believed awareness creates distance. The moment you recognize the voice of endless desire, you stop automatically obeying it. Not every impulse deserves action. Not every emotion deserves belief. Not every desire deserves pursuit. That single realization can save years of unnecessary suffering. Think about how often people destroy their peace because they assume every feeling must be followed. They become angry and immediately react. They feel envy and immediately compare. They feel lonely and immediately seek distraction. Rarely do they pause. Rarely do they observe. Rarely do they ask, what is really happening inside me? The philosophers of ancient Greece often spoke about knowing yourself. Most people imagine that means discovering hidden talents or finding a purpose. Schopenhauer would likely argue that true self-knowledge begins elsewhere. It begins by recognizing the invisible forces attempting to control your attention every single day. Your ego wants recognition. Your fear wants certainty. Your pride wants superiority. Your desires want satisfaction. But wisdom quietly asks a different question. What actually matters? That question has the power to interrupt the endless momentum of the will, because the will thrives on unconscious movement. Awareness slows it down. This is one reason Schopenhauer valued contemplation so deeply. Not because contemplation solves every problem, but because it creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, freedom begins to appear. Modern life rarely allows that space. Everything moves faster. Notifications demand immediate attention. Opinions are formed in seconds. Conversations become arguments before anyone has truly listened. Silence has become uncomfortable because silence leaves room for thought, and thought can challenge everything. Perhaps this is why so many people feel exhausted despite accomplishing more than any previous generation. The body is tired. The mind is overloaded. The soul, if we can call it that, is starving for stillness. The will keeps saying, keep going. But wisdom sometimes whispers, stop. Not forever, just long enough to remember who is actually in control. Because if you never stop, you never notice where you're heading. And if you never question your direction, you may spend decades pursuing a destination that can never satisfy you. Schopenhauer believed there were only a few moments when the relentless grip of the will loosened. One of the most powerful was compassion. Another was silence, but perhaps the most extraordinary escape came through something almost everyone has experienced: art, a piece of music, a painting, a poem, a symphony, a breathtaking landscape. For a few fleeting moments, beauty has the power to interrupt the endless demands of desire. And according to Schopenhauer, those moments reveal something remarkable about what it truly means to be free. That brings us to our next lesson. Number 4, why compassion is stronger than success. Number 4, why compassion is stronger than success. In a world obsessed with winning, compassion often looks like weakness. We're taught to admire those who climb higher, earn more, dominate competitors, and collect achievements as if life were a scoreboard. From an early age, success becomes the measure of value. The louder the applause, the greater the person appears to be. But Arthur Schopenhauer saw something that most people never notice. Success may impress the world. Compassion transforms it. For Schopenhauer, compassion was not simply kindness or generosity. It was one of the rare moments when the illusion separating one individual from another begins to disappear. Normally, the will traps us inside our own desires. We become consumed by our ambitions, our fears, our victories, and our losses. Everything revolves around me, my career, my future, my problems, my happiness, but genuine compassion interrupts that pattern. For a brief moment, another person's suffering becomes just as important as our own. That shift is extraordinary because it weakens the selfish momentum of the will. Imagine walking through a crowded city after a long day. Everyone seems busy. Faces move past each other without making eye contact. People are rushing toward meetings, trains, restaurants, and appointments. Then, on a quiet sidewalk, you notice an elderly man struggling to carry heavy grocery bags. Hundreds of people walk by without slowing down. Each is absorbed in their own concerns, their own deadlines, their own private worlds. But one person stops, without expecting praise, without posting about it online, without waiting for recognition. They simply help. From the outside, it appears to be a small gesture, yet philosophically something profound has happened. For a few moments, the invisible walls built by the ego have cracked. Another person's burden mattered, and in that instant, the will lost some of its power. Schopenhauer believed these moments reveal the highest expression of human character. Not because compassion solves every problem, but because it allows us to step outside the prison of endless self-interest. Ironically, modern society often encourages the opposite. We're constantly reminded to build a personal brand, protect our image, outperform everyone else, become unforgettable. There is nothing inherently wrong with achievement. The problem begins when achievement becomes identity. Because identities built on comparison are always fragile. No matter how successful you become, someone will always have more money, more influence, more beauty, more recognition. If your worth depends on being above others, peace will forever remain out of reach. Schopenhauer understood that competition has no natural ending. It constantly creates new rankings, new expectations, new reasons to feel inadequate. Compassion operates differently. It asks no one to lose. It requires no audience. It doesn't depend on status. It quietly restores something the modern world often forgets: our shared humanity. Buddha expressed a similar insight through the practice of loving kindness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that human beings are made to cooperate, just as hands work together or feet walk side by side. Even Nietzsche, despite his criticism of conventional morality, recognized the importance of overcoming petty resentment and becoming greater than the impulses that keep ordinary minds trapped. Schopenhauer's path was unique. He believed compassion matters because suffering is universal. No one escapes it. The wealthy suffer, the poor suffer, the admired suffer, the forgotten suffer. Behind every confident face exists an invisible battle that strangers will never fully understand. Remember that the next time someone speaks harshly, the next time someone disappoints you, the next time you feel tempted to judge another person too quickly, you may be witnessing only the surface of a story whose deepest chapters remain hidden. Compassion doesn't mean accepting abuse. It doesn't mean abandoning wisdom. It simply means recognizing that every human being carries burdens invisible to everyone else. That understanding softens the heart without weakening the mind. And strangely enough, compassion benefits the one who gives it as much as the one who receives it, because every act of genuine kindness loosens the grip of obsessive self-concern. For a moment, the endless voice saying, "What about me?" falls silent. In its place comes something much quieter, something much stronger: perspective. Once you understand this, success begins to occupy its proper place. It becomes something to enjoy, not something to worship. You can pursue excellence without sacrificing your peace. You can achieve without allowing achievement to define your worth. Yet even compassion cannot completely silence the will. There remains one refuge that Schopenhauer considered almost magical. A place where desire briefly disappears, where the ego grows quiet, and where the human mind catches a glimpse of freedom unlike any other. Surprisingly, that refuge is something many people experience every day without realizing its philosophical power. It begins with a melody, a painting, a novel, a sunset, a masterpiece, and that leads us to one of Schopenhauer's most beautiful ideas. Number 3, art is the only temporary escape. The journey we have taken through Schopenhauer's philosophy was never about discovering a way to escape life. It was about finally seeing life clearly. For centuries, human beings have searched for the secret to happiness. They built kingdoms. They accumulated wealth. They chased recognition. They created endless inventions designed to make existence easier and more comfortable. Yet despite all of this progress, one question remains unchanged. Why does the human mind still struggle to find peace? Why do we continue searching even after we obtain what we wanted? Why does the heart continue feeling empty even when the hands are full? Schopenhauer looked directly into this mystery and discovered something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The problem is not that we desire too little. The problem is that we believe desire will eventually save us. We spend our lives climbing mountains that disappear the moment we reach the top. We chase shadows. We collect things that cannot stay. We seek approval from people who are also searching for approval themselves. And somewhere in the middle of this endless movement, we forget to simply exist. But perhaps existence was never meant to be a constant battle. Perhaps life was never asking us to become perfect. Perhaps it was asking us to become aware of our thoughts, aware of our desires, aware of the invisible forces controlling our emotions. Because the moment you become aware of something, you are no longer completely controlled by it. That is where true freedom begins. Not when you have everything you want, but when you realize you can be at peace without everything you want. This is the lesson that connects Schopenhauer with the greatest traditions of human wisdom. The Stoics understood that peace comes from accepting what cannot be controlled. Buddha understood that attachment creates suffering. Nietzsche understood that suffering can become a source of transformation. And Schopenhauer revealed the hidden mechanism behind it all, the endless will that keeps humanity searching, wanting, and struggling. But understanding this does not have to create despair. It can create liberation, because once you understand the game, you no longer have to be trapped inside it. You can still pursue goals. You can still love deeply. You can still appreciate beauty. You can still build something meaningful, but now you do it from a place of awareness instead of desperation. You no longer chase because you believe you are incomplete. You create because you already understand your own worth. You no longer need the world to constantly prove your value. You simply exist, and that may be the greatest transformation of all. Imagine a person sitting alone near a window during a quiet night. The rain falls outside, the world continues moving, people continue chasing their dreams, millions continue running. After the next achievement, the next distraction, the next temporary satisfaction. But this person is calm, not because they have escaped suffering, not because life became perfect, but because they finally understand something most people never discover. Peace was never waiting at the end of the journey. Peace was something they had to discover within themselves. The mind that constantly says, "I need more," will never rest. But the mind that learns to say, "I already have enough to be present," discovers a freedom that cannot be taken away. And maybe that is the hidden truth of Schopenhauer. Life is not painful because we experience suffering. Life becomes unbearable when we refuse to accept that suffering is part of being human. The goal is not to eliminate every difficult moment. The goal is to become someone who can face difficult moments without losing themselves. Because storms will come. People will leave, plans will fail, time will continue moving forward. But inside the human mind exists a place that can remain untouched, a place of silence, a place of understanding, a place where you are no longer controlled by every desire, every fear, and every expectation. And reaching that place may be the greatest victory a person can achieve. So the next time you feel the pressure to chase more, pause. Look within. Ask yourself, am I pursuing this because it gives my life meaning, or because I am trying to escape? The feeling that something is missing, that single question has the power to change everything. Because sometimes the greatest discovery is not finding what you were searching for. Sometimes the greatest discovery is realizing you were never truly lost. If this philosophy made you reflect on your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. What is one desire you believe has controlled you more than it should? And what is one thing you are choosing to let go of? Remember, the world will always demand more from you, but wisdom teaches you that you do not need to become more to finally be at peace. Thank you for watching. Until the next philosophical journey, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep searching for the truth hidden beneath the surface of life.